Hello. So I'll lean into Hezi. Um, he's a, I think he's a good shepherd. This shepherding, pastoring kind of skill is really important, and it's a skill that I think Hezi has. And so I'm going to play part of this video. You can go check out the rest of it. I'll put a link in the description, and then I will kind of respond with some of my thoughts and try to point at things that he wasn't pointing at. So I want to supplement and complement, and maybe even complement in more than one way. Is there a different spelling for the different kinds of complementing? Okay, here we go.
Found educator, and it taught us to appreciate.
Ooh, that was the wrong timestamp. I think 2:14. Here we go.
In the past, the temple served as a profound educator, and it taught us to appreciate and to integrate our more primitive natural instincts into the fabric of human culture and specifically oriented properly. It also guided us to see that the most basic aspects of our life, if seen through a spiritual lens, and then transforming them into what we see in Leviticus 1:9, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Now, this practice created a more complete and holistic connection and intertwining the youthful and raw the youthful and raw aspects and the intellectual aspects of our beings with uh, the divine inspiration of the prophets that guided us. Now,
So the temple is a place for learning. How we can interact with the creation in a way which is like a pleasing aroma for God. And then there's something about the prophets there. I want to hear it one more time. All right, so there's something happening with um, the prophets and the temple and the practices and it being good and pleasing and causing people to do something which is pleasing to God. So here we go again.
now this practice created a more complete and holistic connection and intertwining the youthful and raw the youthful and raw aspects and the intellectual aspects of our beings with uh, the divine inspiration of the prophets that guided us.
It's interesting. So the context here is sacrifice, and the word practice um, seems important for how we can integrate um, what is inspired by the prophets being those who enter into communion with God. And it's for our good. It's for our, the word might be edification, for our learning. So there's an arena and a place by which there can be the practice of making sacrifices. And it occurs to me is that maybe every practice, to call it, I don't know, every practice slash sacrifice, sacripractice, I don't know what you want to call that. Every sacrificial practice, it's like it requires this effort. It requires this thing that doesn't come easy. It's a you could have kept the thing and you could have avoided the practice and it would have been comfortable, but you're willing to enter into something that's uncomfortable, doing this sacrificial practice, which is good, which is pleasing to God and is helpful and good for people. So I'll let Hezi continue.
Now, this is, of course, influenced by Kabbalistic thought, It's understood that the general partnership exists between the creator and creation. Now, the question of God's need for humans is met with an affirmative, not out of necessity, right? He doesn't need that from us, but from a desire of God to engage with us, showcasing his benevolence towards us. Now, God's willingness to acknowledge humans' offerings as pleasing aromas stresses the vast kindness and relational depth with humanity that God has.
I think it's important to notice that God doesn't need us, but desires us. I think that's important. Maybe there's a perception of that practice at the temple of doing sacrificial practices. Yeah. The sacrificial practices at the temple can be perceived from the outside as somehow being necessary, as opposed to something that is good for the people. It's a different kind of thing, and it's really important. It's an important distinction that would help with a person's understanding of the point of the sacrificial practices.
Maimonides famously suggested that the institution of sacrifices was rooted in the cultural surroundings of ancient Israel, particularly during our exodus from Egypt. Now, the historical context raises the question if their relevance in contemporary times. Now, it might seem that sacrifices do belong to a bygone era. Maimonides himself, in his works, in his texts, hints that there is an enduring significance, really foreseeing the revival in the messianic future when the temple is built. Now, this anticipation suggests that rather than remnants of ancient rituals, sacrifices actually compress a timeless human desire to connect with the divine. Now, this connection is not limited to the internal spiritual practices, but also extends outwardly towards our engagement with the animal kingdom, vegetation, and the natural world in general. Now, Maimonides' perspective reveals a layered understanding of human spirituality.
So there were sacrifices at the temple. There will be a rebuilding of the temple, and there could be sacrifices again. It seems to me that like there is the understanding of sacrifices within Chezi is connected to like a specific instantiation of sacrifices, which involves like sacrificing animals. And it doesn't, yeah, it's ignoring the other kinds of sacrifices, like sacrificing the materialism, the square footage of your house, sacrificing the quality of your clothing and the comfort you experience within throughout each day. Like there's all these sacrificial practices we can do which could be good. And I can't help but think about, he mentioned, I think, rabbi cook and eventual vegetarianism, and that being connected to the sickness and disease in the world today and all the testimonies of the people who go into a lifestyle and a diet which includes the consumption of fruits and vegetables, large amounts of nutritious fruits and vegetables, and it facilitates the healing of disease that modern medicine cannot handle very well. And so there's Hezi points at our desire to be with God, but that desire to be with God is like so intrinsic in creation that we experience it as like a pain and suffering. We might name it corruption, the being away from God, and the practices the non-sacrificial practices, which causes us to be away from God, we can call that corruption, which manifests pain and suffering because it's built into the creation, into us, to experience this kind of pain and suffering as a result of the corruption, the results of practices that are not the right practices, the right sacrificial practices, the right effort. So we just stuff these things in our mouth and in our eyes and our ears and our bodies and do the practices which are not sacrificial because of our seeking immediate gratification and our unwillingness to do a kind of effort and a sacrifice which would be pleasing to God and good for us because it helps us know God better. That's what's coming to mind. Let's let Chazi finish this up.
Where acts of sacrifice symbolize a deep inherent need to encounter sanctity in all forms of life. And this is really affirming the relevance across all the generations, including our own generation today. So the discussion of sacrifice really transcends the literal act of sacrifice, and it touches upon the essential human quest for meaning, connection, and the sacred interaction with the world around us. This really is making a continuum that spans from the ancient to the modern, from the physical to the spiritual. And uh, we need to really see how we incorporate this mindset today in our daily life and see how we engage with all the aspects of our life uh, in some sort of symbolic sacrifice towards the God, orienting it into its proper place. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and peace and tranquility.
So the only thing there that I did not feel good about was the symbolic sacrifice. So yeah, I am unfamiliar with the symbolic sacrifice. I'm more familiar with the kinds of sacrifice which require an effort. The sacrifice of immediate gratification and my own pleasure, my own immediate pleasure. And so it's, yeah, my experience is that a sacrificial practice is not immediately enjoyable and it is not immediately pleasurable. And so when my watch goes off at 3:50 a.m. in the morning, it's like my mind can go to a place, and my mind never goes to a place of, man, I am enjoying life. That's not my first thought. My first thought is, I want to go back to sleep. I want to go back to that dream I was in. I want to stay in this very comfortable bed, And so the getting up at 3:50 a.m. is a bit sacrificial. It's a sacrificial practice. And then I'm able to begin entering. It's a practice of entering into communion with God, entering into fellowship with my brother, and then the joy and the love and the peace grows, and it's like getting charged. Right before I did this video, I went over to GPT-4 and I was going to ask, and hopefully the power doesn't just shut off right now, but I asked, why do Jews ignore me? And then the power goes, bam, the whole house. These kinds of things happen. And it's like, what does that mean? The timing of these things, of the technology just being coincidentally altered. What does that mean? So I don't know what that means. I get the feeling that Maimonides is being loved more than me, right? And I get the feeling that Moses is being loved more than me. And I get the feeling that the prophets are being loved more than me. And the kings of old who are dead are being loved more than me. And so it sounds like it's all about me. And that's okay. Is it okay? I mean, it doesn't hurt. I feel at peace with it. But so that's my observation, is that people will love that which is dead and that which has died more than that which is alive. And so, yeah, the symbolic sacrifice, it does not seem alive. The symbolic sacrifice, it seems disconnected from that which is alive. There you go. The living God that's here and now. So, yeah, I think we're trying to have a relationship with God. And we try to learn sacrificial practices. So on YouTube, a sacrificial practice could be, let us not criticize people with text and comments. And maybe maybe these Jews know some wisdom here, and so they might not respond to me in text in a criticizing way, because they are doing a practice, a wise practice. And then the question would be, is like, well, how do you engage on the topic? So is there an invitation for people to engage on the topic? And that commenting, like when people want to criticize in a comment, there is an immediate gratification in expressing that animosity, that animus, the spirit of animosity, the spirit of contention. And so there can be a sacrifice in, don't click the submit button. And seek counsel with your brother. And there can be that way. Or perhaps there's a comment like, I would like to speak with you about this topic. So there is a sacrificial practice we avoid the temptation through our sacrificial practices. We learn to avoid the temptations through our sacrificial practices. We learn to avoid fornication and pornography through our sacrificial practices. We learn to avoid violence through our sacrificial practices. We learn to keep and maintain peace through our sacrificial practices. No temple required, or not that temple that was only meant to be symbolic, right? Like, the temple is a vessel, and there's many vessels, and there's spirit within the vessels. And so there's a sacrifice that can be made within the temple, which is this vessel, such that we learn to avoid being angry at our brother. We learn to avoid being lustful toward our brother's spouse or wife. And so there becomes these practices which we learn. And the practice might even be to, in some cases, cut off your hand or pull out your eyeball, right? It would be better for a man to cut off his hands and not steal. And it would be better for a man to cut out his eyes and not lust. And so what that might mean is, maybe I need some handcuffs, or maybe I need my eyes blindfolded, and maybe I need to do this practice in life every day for days and days and weeks and weeks. Maybe I can do a sacrificial practice to deal with the temptations to seek pleasure, the temptations within this temple, the spiritual temptations within this temple to seek pleasure. So, and perhaps you learn the practice of attractive woman enters the room, wearing provocative clothing and behaving in provocative ways, and the gaze moves away, and maybe even the person leaves that area. And maybe society should not shame the person who does that. And maybe the one that's being provocative and wearing provocative clothing could extend some kind of kindness to those others who are easily tempted. And maybe those people who are provocative would not use their power over those who are easily tempted. And so, yeah, the power got shut off on me. The power got turned off. So, yeah, the power is not with me. Is that it? The answer? The power is not with me? Perhaps at some point in time I will say something, and then the power will be with me. The power is with me right now. I have not been struck down by lightning, and the lightning is still running through all of these conductive materials for this recording. So the power is with me? I don't know. Will the hearts receive the message? I don't control that either. I'm pretty sure God controls that, what's in each person's heart. And only God knows your heart. I don't know your heart. But this topic of temples and sacrificial practices and getting closer to God and reducing the corruption in the world is very relevant and important. Very interesting. It's worth thinking about. It's worth having conversations about. It's worth figuring out. We have all these new tools in this modern world, and we do not know how to use them. It's like handing a nuclear bomb to a bunch of cavemen, a bunch of primitive people, who don't even know about fire. Here, go play with this toy. That's what the internet is, and the different software and information technology, and our ability to communicate in all of these different ways on all of these different mediums. And we don't even look at the public education system. We do not require our children to learn how to do conflict resolution and to learn the skill by which peace can be created and maintained. We don't teach that. We teach mathematics, science, reading, writing, athletics in the gymnasium, music, but there is no required testing and practicing of the skills by which peace would be possible. And so we leave the public education system unequipped for life, for a peaceful life. So then we go into marriage, and then many marriages fail because we never learned to create and maintain the peace and to resolve conflict. And friendships fail, and there's so much we can do. There's so many sacrificial practices we can make. There's so many changes we can make to the practices we do, and we can change the arenas we play in to make the world a much better place. So, thank you for your time and attention. I am Gavin, the Rambling Man. Bye-bye.